welcome. We hope you've had something to eat, maybe a snack or two, and you're full, you're ready to go. Maybe a nice night's sleep, hopefully a nap. You're feeling rested because it's time for tennis, folks. This is Eat Sleep Tennis, your weekly show covering everything tennis, maybe a midweek check-in. Heck, we'll probably do it. We feel pretty responsible. Joining me, as always, looking very nice and coming off her announcement. She'll probably spend a lot of time talking about this as she'll no longer be on TVG talking about horses. Figure out something else to do, because if we're not moving forward, what the heck are we doing? How you feeling, Candace?
I'm feeling good. I'm excited to be here with you guys and talk a little bit of tennis. And Alex, we know you had your day with the women's tennis yesterday, so I'm looking forward to some men's talk today.
Wonderful. Me too. You know, men's tennis is the best, right, Steve?
Oh, look, I'm still on the fence. The men's is good because you get the ATP and the Challenger. The ITF needs to lift its game a little bit, I think, on the women's side. But look, I'm just glad to see that you're back after me having a go at your Philadelphia 76ers yesterday. So I mean, if I said sorry, I'd be lying, but that's okay. We can move past it.
Well, I just want everyone to know that you're to blame for the fact that we had to mark yesterday's episode as, what was it? Explicit. I can't think of that word. It's so very good. Anyway, tennis, men's tennis, folks. That's what we're here to talk about. We've got two tournaments, and we'll start in Turkey with Antalya. 32 men in the field. We'll start with the top half here. Matteo Berrettini is the first seed. Struff is the fifth seed down there at the bottom of the half as you start to look through the middle. Alba, Chardy, Fanini is playing this week. Bublik, Caruso, Gir. We'll start with you here, Steve. I mean, what do you see as you start to look at this top half? What names stick out to you? Anything to attack?
Well, look, I think when you look at it, and it kind of comes along with our previews yesterday, the qualifying lists aren't as strong as we'd normally see. So when you're seeing a couple of those names there next to qualifiers for round one, it's I mean, it's not necessarily a buy, but it's certainly going to be effectively one-sided matches for a number of these players. Looking at the prices and looking at, Matteo Berrettini at the top there, obviously it's a pretty, comfortable ride for him through there when you look at, players in terms of hard court level, at least till, probably the third round there. But look, one that caught my eye just in this particular half is, look, I'm a big fan of kind of taking on Fabio Fognini on hard courts in these type of brackets and quarters there. So Jan-Lennard Struff is someone who does kind of catch my eye. Just at that first glance of the top half.
Hey, that's an interesting name there. I've got another one circled, but Candace, I'll let you jump in here. What do you see when you look at this group?
Yeah, I thought when I looked at this group that the first name you look to, of course, is going to be Berrettini. He sticks out right there at the top. I know Steve said that he felt like he has a really comfortable ride, and he might. I mean, it's one of those tricky things that I feel like these are matches he should be winning, but I'm not necessarily sure that they're going to be easy matches, I suppose I would say. If it does wind up, and by all means it should, being Berrettini against Laszlo Djere, that's a really interesting match to me. Berrettini has beaten him on both times I think that they've played on hard courts, but you've had a couple of close matches in there, so that's one that I would give a look at when you're looking on a match-to-match basis. But I think ultimately, as you get deeper in the tournament, that this quarter looks really difficult for Berrettini. So I'm looking to some of kind of the smaller names moving forward here. Someone like an Igor Gerasimov is interesting to me, but I echo Steve's thoughts on getting past Fognini. I certainly think, well, we all kind of know this is not his best surface, and I think his section is very difficult.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on Berrettini. I think that he has kind of an easy path here to that match against Struff. I know that Gir can maybe throw a little versatility at him, but this is a solid place for him to be. He had a bunch of success actually last year playing on hard courts. Actually, somehow was able to level up despite kind of all the craziness that was going on last year. But I just see him being an overwhelming favorite in just about every match until he gets to Struff. If Struff's there, I'm pretty sure he's beaten Struff before at least once, if not twice, and should just be fine in that match. So it's odd. As someone that, again, normally bets the WTA and is used to attacking much bigger numbers in some of these outright positions. As I start to look at that 3-1, I almost wonder if it's value given, as I start to look at what some of these money lines like look along the way, starting to put them together. I wonder how long it would even take me to get to 3-1. So Berrettini was the name I had circled there, actually.
Yeah, look,
very different.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those tournaments, and when you look at it overall, there are some other factors, I guess, to take into consideration. That we've got, a number of these players will be heading to Australia, so they'll be traveling to Dubai and then on to Australia for the hotel quarantine period before the Grand Slam. Just something to keep in mind that, look, I would imagine that if some player on site here tests positive, which we've seen in a couple of other tournaments at the end of last year, I'd imagine there might be a couple of players who'd be wanting to kind of hightail it out of the premises to kind of get away, because if you do test positive now, then you're not going to be on that plane to Melbourne, I think, with the rest of the players. So it is something to consider that, there are players here who will be in Melbourne, but there's also a number of players who have bypassed Melbourne and will be perhaps more invested in this week as well.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what motivation is like here. If Panini is someone that is not, usually someone that excels in some of these smaller tournaments here, we'll see how he does, which is, again, part of the reason I just think this top half is so easy. If I thought Panini was playing well and he was interested in having the Italian match, to make the finals there, maybe I'd be a little more scared. But, motivation is interesting for him this week.
Every week.
Every week. He's one of those guys that's, people always ask me, like, who are the best men's tennis players? And as a joke, I'll always say Fabio Fognini when he cares.
Yeah, all in or all out, right? That's what he is. It's 0 or 100.
Right.
And I think you could maybe make a case for him when he's got, a little bit of form behind him, but we don't even know if that's there.
Right. Any other thoughts here on the top half before we jump into the bottom?
Nope.
All right, as we start to look at the bottom here, we've got Nicolas Basilashvili at the top, David Goffin at the bottom. As we start to look through the middle here, De Minaur, Kekmanovic, Ruusuvuori here, Yuri Vesely, Herbert's here. I'll start with you this time, Candace. Who sticks out to you in this bottom half, and where do you maybe see some value?
I mean, I might be alone. I found the bottom half to be so much more boring than the top half. When you explained Alex, it sounded like you saw the opposite, but I found this half to be fairly boring. De Minaur sticks out. I would be pretty surprised if he didn't make his way through this. Goffin, always you have to respect, but I'm just not sure that the matchups for him, especially if he did make it all the way to playing De Minaur, are really favorable. So I would look for Alex to make it through rather comfortably, and it looks a pretty straightforward half for me.
Yeah, I think I like De Minaur here too, but why don't you jump in, Steve? What do you see here?
Yeah, look, it's nice to hear you guys talk about the Australian, so I don't have to do it. But look, I'm agreeing. I think with De Minaur here, I think he's got probably the most favourable matchup in terms of other seed in his quarter. It is probably not the strongest quarter when you look at it on paper. So couple that with the fact that he is going to be. You generally know that when he steps on court, he is going to give 100% and put in his best effort. And he did start the year well last year. Looking to maybe to the bottom quarter there, could maybe make a case for Kekmanovic. I think it's if you want to play around that Goffin Herbert first round is a bit of a tricky one. So maybe the other seed there could make a little bit of a run, but. Look, if you had to pick one out of this court or this half, I think you'd be leaning towards the Australian.
Yeah, I like the price in De Minaur, and again, it's weird for me to say I like someone who's only 4-1 here. But one of the reasons I think there is value in some of these shorter numbers because Goffin is the second favorite to win this. He's 3.5-1, and I think that in this tournament that really doesn't have that many great players, he's somehow run into this brutal draw. Herbert is not going to be an easy match in the first round. Second round shouldn't be too tough. And he's looking at Kekmanovic, De Minaur, and Berrettini probably to win the tournament. I mean, that's the toughest path that anyone has throughout this entire thing. I mean, you look at it, Berrettini might get to the finals, and that's going to be the first real difficult match he faces, even if it's De Minaur. So looking again, it's a tournament to me where if you try to tier out the players, in terms of who you think's best, I think there's a clear top tier in this tournament, and both the next one. And as you start to look at those top tier players, it's the ones that have the best setup. And, Goffin at this point, I wonder how, again, similar to Fanini, how interested is he in playing a small tournament like this, trying to go a long week and take a title as opposed to maybe get some practice in, get on a plane, get to Australia and get comfortable and collect as many points as you can there versus trying to beat yourself up this week. So echo your thoughts on de Minaur. I like him, and he's somebody that I definitely have circled.
Goffin's tricky too. And when I was looking at his matches, not only do they look like matches that he could possibly lose, but even when I was looking through it, each one I'm like, oh, that'll be a long match. Oh, that'll be a long match. Like, you just feel like even if he makes it far, that he's going to be, many, many more hours of tennis in than some of these other guys, even if, he's able to surpass it through.
And I think that's the thing with him, that he is, his best tennis is able to match it with everyone in this field, but we just haven't seen that since the COVID break. And I know he did struggle late in the latter part of last year as a result. So look, I think that's probably a key thing, I think, there. If we maybe just jump through, so a little bit like we did in episode 1, if we just jump into our got a couple of different picks from each of us. So I might lead this one off. Well, actually, we'll go to you, Alex. So who's your ace or your top pick for today? I've gone for you in alphabetical order. So we'll start with Alex.
Despite how much Candace has taken her turn this time at coming at me on the podcast, I'm going with Matteo Berrettini. I think that he has a great chance here. I think that he is, again, as I talked about it, you try to tier out, or at least I do every week. Here's kind of the cream of the crop, and here's kind of everybody else. I think Berrettini is pretty much head and shoulders better than everybody in the top half of the tournament, and frankly, most of the guys in the bottom, except maybe de Minaur and Goffin if he's motivated. Obviously, we talked about that being a struggle. So really like Berrettini here. I think that he deserves to be the favorite. I'd actually probably make him a shorter number here if I was hanging lines. I'd probably have it maybe even in the 2-1 range as opposed to the 3-1 that I'm getting here. So like him, and he's also my pick to win.
Fair enough. All righty, and if we jump over now to you, Candace, who's your pick?
I like Jan-Lennard Struff for this tournament. When I was going through his draw, I thought it was a really favorable one. If Fognini is even still around when they would play each other in the third round, he's played very well against him in the past. If you were able to win that, then you would be looking for the winner of Gerasimov or Berrettini. And either of those are very possible. Again, I think Berrettini has a tougher match than advertised against Laszlo Djere. So maybe that'll kind of soften him up just a touch. But after that, there isn't much there. And if he were to make it through past that and play de Minaur, again, it's another person that he's played very well against in the past. He was able to beat him in Cincinnati rather comfortably. Even prior to that, he had played very well against him on outdoor hard courts over at Indian Wells. So I think this is somebody who, is on the verge of a little bit of a breakthrough, and this tournament feels right. So many guys in this tournament, when I was going through the draw individually, there weren't the big names that you felt like, oh, this match is hard, but it felt like the matchups maybe necessarily weren't favorable for that specific player. And I don't really see that being as much of a problem for Struff.
Sounds more than fair enough to me. And my pick, so look, as you've probably gauged from discussing before, I've decided to go with Alex de Minaur here.
Do you not have a little flag to wave? We got to get you a little Australia flag.
No, I'll try and come up with
a little koala, a little bear on the side.
I'll see what I can come up with. But look, I think
a kangaroo hat, big can of Fosters.
Anything else, Alex?
No, that's it. That's good.
So look, yeah, de Minaur, you know what you're going to get when he steps on court. So we don't have that question mark. I think, it's a very favorable quarter for him. I'd be very surprised if he wasn't in the final four, and I would imagine it would be an injury or some sort of mild injury concern that would be the only thing that should stop him from being there, later in the week for this particular tournament. Now, if we jump over to, well, we may as well continue with this theme. Who's your value pick? When I say value, Alex, I mean who's your biggest value selection?
I should get my own little Australian flag here because it's Alex de Minaur, baby. I love his price at 4-1. I think that he has a great little draw here. As easy as I think Berrettini's draw is, I start to look at what de Minaur has to go through. I don't see who really troubles him unless Kekmanovic is playing some really great tennis there. Again, I think that he has just a nice, easy, open path to the final. So excited to see how this doesn't end up being Berrettini and De Minaur, but I'm grabbing a little bit of each.
It's fair enough to me. How about you, Candice? Who's your value pick? I feel like it might be up the top somewhere around Berrettini.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell what portion of the draw that I thought was favorable for some prices. So I wound up putting my value pick as Igor Gerasimov. I love his first round match for him, and I think he should be able to make his way past Bublik if the two of them were to play against each other. Again, potentially sets up for a match against Berrettini, which obviously I'm the only one here who thinks maybe he's a touch vulnerable in this race, but he's played well against him before. He's beaten him on an outdoor hard court before and indoor, I suppose, over in St. Petersburg. So he's played well against Berrettini in the past. Maybe the potential undoing for him would be going up against Struif, but if it ends up being Gerasimov and Struif at that stage of the tournament, I'm a happy camper, so it's all good for me.
More than fair enough. And look, part of that, I agree with that value pick as well, and that kind of ties in with my pick of I've gone with Struif as the pick for me, just because I feel like that first quarter is a little bit more competitive than the second quarter. So I've tried to go to the other half to my pick of De Minaur as the outright selection, and I think the German's probably the best value here. Gets a qualifier and potentially another qualifier in the second round, and the best player he'll come across in his quarter is arguably Fabio Fognini. So happy to take his price. I think he's sitting around that 9-1 or 10-1 at most bookmakers that have futures out. So I think he's a good value spot there. And look, if he were to make it, as you said, to the semi-final there, that there's a good value position there, I think, with a decent ticket. Now, more importantly, who do we think is overvalued in this particular part? So we might start again. We'll go back to you again, Alex. Where are you looking for an overvalued player in the current markets?
Touched on a little bit earlier. I think that you need your head examined if you're trying to bet David Goffin here at 3.5-1 or at single digits even here. Like I mentioned, has the absolute toughest draw of anybody. Basically has to beat every good player to win this tournament here. Has all the reason in the world to play a couple matches, pack his bags, and head to Australia early to get comfortable for some of those events. I think that his price is just way too short here.
Short, sharp, and to the point. Nice. Now, I feel like we may not need to hold everyone in suspense for yours, Candice, but who have you gone for?
Oh my gosh, it's a shock. I know. I'm going to be going in for Berrettini as my overvalued player. I just think that I see potential for a defeat in just about every match aside from his first round one. Right when you get past the first round, again, I've mentioned this Laszlo Djere match a couple of times. I think you can guess where I'm going to be heading if it does wind up formalizing that way for round number two. But whether it's Djere, whether it's Gerasimov, whether it's Struif, I just see each of those as being a potential minefield for Berrettini. They are guys who maybe don't have an overwhelming record against him, but they've taken him close or have won matches against him in the past on hard courts. So for me, I'd be looking to play against the Italian.
Perfect. And I'll continue on with the Italian flavor, and I will be talking again, shock horror, Fabio Fognini. I think, if he was able to produce some form, keep in mind, at the end of last year, he was coming off double ankle surgery, so still finding his way back late in the season, but there was nothing there that caught my eye. If he were to come out and win this tournament, then fantastic. But looking at his price, I think he's fourth favorite or so in the market at the moment, and it just wasn't something that really jumped out to me at the moment when you look at some of the other players that we know have some slightly better form. But looking at the surface and what we're dealing with here, I think he's just a little bit short in the market.
Well, either Candice will be right or I'll be right. So got all our bases covered, folks.
Exactly.
Yeah, somebody wins.
Any other thoughts on Antalya here before we jump into Delray?
No.
Go ahead, Steve.
No, I think we're all good. And I think it's a pretty competitive draw there, in some regards, considering the circumstances that we are at with this first week on the men's tour, with another tournament on offer, and then looking at a lot of players who will be in Australian Open qualifying in a couple of days who obviously aren't taking part in these handful of tournaments.
Yeah, Delray was a little interesting to me because unlike Antalya, where two names really stuck out to me, this one was a little tougher. I think this one might be a little more competitive in spots. Again, we'll start with the top half here. We have Christian Guerin at the top as the number 1 seed, Pablo Andahar at the bottom as the 7 seed. As we look in the middle, Ivo Karlovic, our buddy Noah Rubin, Hubert Herkaz, Sam Querrey, we found him. He escaped Russia, ladies and gentlemen, and he's in Florida. So if they don't know that, hopefully someone from the ATP is watching and they can find him. Mackie McDonald and some other names. We'll start with you here this time, Candace. What do you see here at the top half of Delray? What sticks out to you?
I think the thing that sticks out obviously is Christian Guerin being the number 1 seed. Just a little bit more pressure than maybe what he's had to deal with in recent times. I think he has a fairly easy first couple of, he obviously has a bye to begin things and then potentially a qualifier in round number 2. So he has things fairly easy in the beginning, but there are some tricky steps there after that. Ryan Harrison even has a wild card. Obviously not the player he once was, but it's still somebody who's been around, very difficult in that way. Sam Querrey, who knows what to expect from him, but we know at his very best, he probably should be able to beat Guerin. So I think that it's a little bit of a minefield for him once he gets past maybe his second match. So that's where I'd be looking. I think maybe if you were looking for somebody in this half, you'd be looking a little bit, maybe Harrison or Querrey.
How about you, Steve? Anything pop out to you?
I mean, first of all, I think the main thing that pops out, this is a hard court tournament, isn't it?
I believe so.
Because it just doesn't have that look to it when you look at the seed at the top and the bottom of this particular half. Look, it does look like it's a great opportunity for a couple of the North American or the American players here, looking at Querrey, McDonald and Harrison to be able to try and earn some points here. Obviously, the advantage for for Herkach and Guerin that they're able to get that first round bye. But look, I just see opportunity, I think, for a number of players here. Look at the likes of, Noah Rubin, and like I said, Ryan Harrison, these players to be able to try and earn some pretty significant ATP points with not as competitive a list, I guess, of players here through the draw. I think for me, and we'll touch on it a little bit later, I mean, there's a couple of big serving players. It isn't the fastest hard court in the world here in Delray Beach, so it is worth, I guess, keeping that in mind that it is a little bit on the slower side, so it'll sit up and allow players to still serve quite well, but to be able to really hit through in terms of their ground stroke. So there are a couple of the Americans there that catch an eye, but I'll be fascinated to see how this first round in particular shapes the rest of this draw for us to talk about a little bit later in the week as well.
Yeah, this was a tough kind of top half for me to look at. Again, don't have a ton of faith in the top seed on this surface. Herkaz has kind of a nice draw here. It looks like he's the favorite in the betting markets, and I guess more than anything, that's just the draw. When we get down to the bottom half, it seems like a lot of the talent is loaded down there. Again, as you start to look at the seeds here, it's Guerin, it's Andahar, who aren't really hardcore players. We'll see what he's got coming along, let alone the fact that he actually has one of the tougher first-round matches here. So Herkaz was the name that stuck out to me. I don't know if I love the price, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, a little bit later, but nothing else really stuck out to me for the top half here.
Fair enough. Shall we move on to the bottom half?
Let's do it.
All right.
Got Tiafoe, our seed there at the top. Isner, who's probably not going to be wearing a mask, unfortunately, as the seed down there at the bottom. Tommy Paul's in the middle, Montero, Bellucci, Korda, Kwan, Cam Norrie. A lot of really fun names in here. I think this is probably the most competitive half of both tournaments, if you will, this week. I'll give Steve a break while he kind of cools down there. Candace, what do you see?
I'm really excited about this half. I think, as you mentioned, there are so many big names and there are so many players that you are waiting for them to kind of take that step. And that's maybe one of the most fun aspects about this tournament in particular to me is you have a really good mix, in my opinion, of like guys who have just started to kind of make their way up to, a top 50 sort of a level. And then like savvy veterans who've been around forever, who maybe aren't playing the way that they once did, but on their best day that they're more than capable. And that's what makes this half interesting to me. Certainly, I thought that there was more ability, and I think that we'll probably see your winner come from this half.
Yeah, the same way Steve gets excited about the Australians. We've got 4 really nice American players in this half. Tiafoe is a great player when he's playing well. At the very least, he's always interesting. Tommy Paul's been playing better and better. Korda seems to be kind of starting to level up, and he might reach some of the potential we've seen from him. And then Isner, say what you will about him, is still one of the best American tennis players that we have. So a lot of interesting matches here. I'd like to try to attack Tommy Paul here a little bit. I think he's one of the more underrated players. I know that he hasn't beaten Isner yet, but he's played him a couple times before, so he should be used to the pace and speed that's coming after him. So Tommy Paul was the name that stuck out to me, and I see a little bit of value there. How about you, Steve?
Look, I tend to agree with that around Tommy Paul. And when I looked at this entry list, I was really keen to see how his draw did stack up. Then he's probably got one of the more difficult draws, I think, of those bigger names or those players that are kind of 10-1 and below. He's basically going to be facing Kwon or Sebastian Korda in the second round, and then get Isner in the third round just to get out of the quarter, which means then he's still got a couple of players who are in form and beyond that. So, look, I think that's a missed opportunity, I guess, and it's an unfortunate draw, I think, for Tommy Paul. I think the third quarter might be a little bit more attackable in some regards. I mean, Francis Tiafoe, if he brings his best tennis, I think he is a genuine chance this week. But again, I don't see too much value, I think, in his price. It is a nice little pocket there, though, with Fratangelo as well as a couple of qualifiers. But look, Cam Norrie is one that might sneak under the radar in one of these kind of pre-slam tournaments. Or it might be an opportunity for Adrian Manarino to break through and claim another title. It's certainly, I think, a little bit more balanced, I think, than we saw in the top half.
Yeah, Manarino with a bye was kind of interesting, but I'm going to pass. I think there's a lot more competitive players there. Any other thoughts from you guys here on this bottom half?
Nope. Alrighty. Shall we pop back through and we'll list back through our top picks for Delray Beach? We'll just jump this one away. We'll start with you this time, Candace. Who's your top pick for the tournament?
My top pick is John Isner. So I saved my wrap up there of the quarter for that, because obviously we heard Alex speaking about Tommy Paul. And when I was looking over the odds for this tournament, the one thing I was struck by is how relatively close Tommy Paul and Isner were odds-wise. I thought that it was completely skewed in the wrong direction. I think that, this is a tournament that in theory, surface-wise should really be favorable to Isner. I don't think that his draw is particularly difficult there at the bottom. The worst he probably faces is Paul, who he's beaten, on a number of occasions now. So I like for him to kind of skirt his way through this bottom half of the draw. And I think that he's clearly the one to beat. And his price, despite being on the short side, obviously one of the bigger names, it was surprisingly larger than I thought it would be.
Alrighty, and how about you, Alex?
As I started to look at my ace here, again, a little tougher tournament for me to try to go ahead and pick a winner. So I did end up going with Hurkacz again. As much as I don't like his price, I think the market is right here to have him as the favorite. And this is mostly just kind of a path of least resistance pick. Again, I think most of the talent and great players are down there at the bottom beating each other up. He has a chance to kind of start the season with a few nice matches there. So I'm happy to pick him as my winner, although I will not be wagering on it.
Fair enough. I think, and this is probably going to shock you guys a little bit, but my pick I've decided to go for here is one Samuel Querrey. Look, we found him, so that's a good start. We know where he is, and we know, look, he's actually probably turned it into quite a little nice situation for him, because I saw he did do a bit of an article detailing his little quarantine exploits. So good for him. It's nice to see him taking advantage of the pandemic. I think, though, in this particular situation, look, he brings his best tennis in North America. He has put in some decent performances here in the past. I did go short with Alex de Minaur in the other tournament, so I wanted to try and find a little bit more value here, and I think he's in the mid-20s range, I think, in terms of his odds. So, look, if he can find his serve, which he struggled with a little bit last year, or he struggled with a lot of things last year, I think that is going to go a long way in that particularly more favourable, as I said, that top half of the draw. Alrighty, we'll pop into the value selections, and we'll go to you, Alex, first. Who have you got?
Well, since I just decided to oppose Candace as much as possible tonight, I like Tommy Paul here. I think he has a great chance to beat Isner. I think he had a really nice season last year. Again, despite kind of all the craziness there, I think that he actually has, it's obviously he's got to play a first match, and Isner has a bye. But I think that he'll have a chance to kind of 2 matches under his belt, get a feel for this. I don't know how fast this court's going to be. So, if it's a little bit slow, I think he'll have a nice chance here to get his first win over Isner. And at that point, you're kind of playing with house money. So happy to grab him at what I'm seeing, 7-1. I think that's a little underpriced for me.
Interesting. There's so much tension today after I feel like I started it off yesterday with the Philadelphia talk, and now we're all kind of been disagreeing on some things. But something we did agree on, and I think it was yourself and myself, Candace. Do you want to maybe go first? Who's your value pick?
This is eat, sleep, tennis. Candace and Alex go to war clearly for this one. But my value pick is going to be Cam Norrie. I love his position in the draw. I like the way that he finished off last year as well. Of course, we know about the big victory against Schwartzman and what was a long, tough match. But I keep looking back when I think about him to his performance against Milos Raonic over at Antwerp. And even though he lost, I thought that we felt like we saw a new level of him on that occasion. It feels like he's really ready to have a breakthrough year, and this looks like a great spot for him. Draw-wise, he should be favorable. We've seen him defeat Mannarino on a couple of occasions, including once on an outdoor hard court. So for me, I would be looking to Cam Norrie here to kind of continue what was a good second half of 2020 for him.
And look, I'm not going to try and rehash what you've just said, and I completely agree. I think he's my pick as well in terms of that value longer price. Has the ability, and I think matches up pretty well against Adrian Mannarino. So that would be the first kind of seeded matchup for him. I think the outdoor conditions do suit him a little bit more than what we saw him play at the end of last year and play quite well. So I'm happy to agree there. I think that's where the agreement ends, because we'll just jump over to Alex now. Who's your overvalued player for the tournament?
Well, it's good that we're just showing the people that we are here speaking our minds and, not trying to set this up in this way. I promise this happened naturally. I think John Isner's really overvalued here. I don't think that these are great conditions for him necessarily. We'll see. Maybe the court's going to be a little faster than I'm expecting it to be. But I think that, again, I like Tommy Paul. I think that's going to be a tough match for him to get over. And I don't think people are giving credit even overall that, again, he's got to beat Paul probably. He's looking at Tiafoe there. And then, whoever comes out of the first half, whereas some of these other guys have a little bit of an easier walk and don't have as much trouble on their way to the finals. So I'll be passing on John Isner.
Fair enough. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. And that's the thing about opinions. We can all have them, and yours are hopefully a little bit incorrect this time, Alex, but that's okay. Candace, how about you? Who have you got as the overvalued pick?
I think the overvalued pick is Frances Tiafoe. I think that you're seeing a short price because obviously those first couple of matches should be relatively comfortable. But this is a player who it feels like time and time again is put up at short prices off of name and potential. Now we're always like, well, maybe this is the year, or maybe this is the year. And just hasn't been the year. He's a very inconsistent player for mine. He's a difficult one for me to ever really take in an outright form, just because it feels like from one match to the next, you don't always know what you're going to get with him. So I'd be looking for other directions, knowing that we're first tournament of the year, and knowing that you're dealing with an inconsistent type who, again, I think people bet him because they're projecting improvement. And I don't like, whether it's people or horse racing, that I came from the horses. I don't ever like betting anything at a short price that requires improvement in order to win.
Look, that makes a lot of sense to me. I agree with that one completely, and I think that ties in well. And another player who I think has shown particular improvement over the last kind of 12 to 18 months, but more so on clay, is my overvalued player. So I've gone with Gurin so I'm going against the top seed here. I think he's just a little bit too short in these conditions on hard court, given the situation. It's no knock on him as a player overall. I just think that there's a bit more value to be found elsewhere, I think, in this particular draw. I'll be very keen to get involved with him at some pretty big prices, I think, in some of the bigger clay court tournaments later in the year. But I just don't see him as being a particularly value selection, I think, for this particular tournament. Now, I think we just had a couple of comments. So thank you for those who've kind of joined in for the live component of this episode. There was a question we did have from here. Are we worried about Isner's form? Definitely the best talent, but I'm fairly lukewarm on his 2020. I think, we have covered that off a little bit, that some of us have a higher opinion of John this week than others. But he is one of those players, and it'll be really interesting to see how things pan out for him this week. That small North American hardcourt tournament is kind of his sweet spot. Less pressure, less big opponents to face. So, look, if there were ever an opportunity, I think this is that one for him. But yeah, I think it should be a pretty interesting first week of men's tennis across the two tournaments.
I think form has to be even for me picking him, the concern is his recent form. But I'd also add to that a player of his type, I don't have as much struggle worrying about them finding form, because there are just less moving parts than there are for some other types of players, right? If his serve is working, we're good.
Definitely. Alrighty. I think we've knocked off both of the draws in pretty good time, team. Any last thoughts on either of the tournaments from either of you?
No, nothing else from me. I think that's just about all I've got.
I'm going to be around cheering myself on to beat Alex. That's my motivation for the week now.
Ooh.
That's fair. Everyone, I must say, I've done it for a couple of years, and it's a lot of fun. Alrighty. Well, we might wrap it up there, I think, for the episode. Thank you to those who've tuned in live, and thanks for those who are listening back to this later in the podcast format. Hopefully we'll have it up on every type of podcast platform that's available, however many tens there are of those particular platforms. But a big thank you to those who've tuned in over the first couple of episodes as well. Obviously, this is something new and trying something a little bit different. And look, we'll be ideally back later in the week to do a little bit of a midweek check-in and to see if Alex or Candace has been more correct. That's the only reason I'm here now.
It'll be fun. We'll see you in a few days, folks.
All righty. Thanks again for tuning in.